music, and especially with memory, has a way of penetrating very deep. And, anyone knows, like, if you listen to a song today that you really loved when you're 14, you can go back there, like in your mind, in your heart, in your body, in your nervous system, or at least I can. I think it's somewhat of a universal experience. And even if you recognize, like, oh, this song's actually really corny, I wouldn't show this to someone, like, you got to hear this song. It's going to blow your mind. It's going to change your life. But you can listen to it. And I go running a lot, and I listen to music, and a lot of that music I wouldn't share with other people. And a lot of it is CCM from the 80s and 90s, but it still hits me.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Between You and Me podcast. My name is Jessica Morris. I'm a music journalist and author from Australia, and every episode we talk to a music maker about things that hurt, heal, and change us in church and evangelical culture. I love doing this. I've been doing this now for like 6 years. And this year, 2025, has been a particularly significant year, I would say, in Christian music and in the life, I guess, of this podcast, which is ironic because we've only had a handful of episodes. But that's because I have been so busy reporting on Michael Tait and allegations about this stalwart in Christian music. A lot of you guys will have followed this, but I just wanted to give you a recap. If you're new, hi, it is so nice to talk with you. Welcome to the family. We've been doing this for a little while, but I'm so glad to have you at the table. As a recap for a lot of you guys, I've been doing this for some time now, and you guys will have known that. We've talked to upcoming musicians of Christian music as well as some really established people. Heard some amazing stories along the way, a lot about hurt and healing and redemption. We've talked about some really sticky topics, but that we really like to wrestle with. Things like church hurt, things like disillusionment, and even at times we've touched on the underbelly of Christian music. And somehow while we were having those conversations and while I was talking to people in Nashville, I stumbled on these stories about Michael Tait. So if you haven't read them, pause for a second, pause this, go Google Michael Tait, T-A-I-T. We're talking about the former member of DC Talk and the former frontman of the Newsboys. And basically I stumbled across stories about, I would say, misconduct is the best way I can generalize it, but things that were really questionable and genuinely really concerning for a lot of people I was talking to. And I was asked if I could do something with that. Basically, is there anyone who can stop these actions which people thought were really happening? And I'm talking about sexual assault and some other things around that. Basically, over the last 2.5 years, I've been working on those stories. So if you've Googled that now, you will see a whole bunch of stories come up from The Guardian by a journalist called Josiah Hesse, and hopefully from the Roy's Report under my name, Jessica Morris. And over the last few months, Josiah and I have individually been reporting on different stories of alleged sexual assault survivors, alleged cover-up, and things like that. There's a lot to this story, especially for people in evangelical circles. I anticipate most people listening to this have probably heard the name Michael Tait or DC Talk or the Newsboys before, because if you've grown up in the evangelical church or culture, these are I would say cornerstones of the culture that we live in. They sort of really established what was cool. And I don't say that in a cliche way, but they established a new sound in contemporary Christian music that made us go, oh wow, it's not just hymnals or even acoustic singer-songwriter like Amy Grant, who was fabulous, by the way, but we can have grittier music. We can have rap and rock and soul. Bonus points if you recognize that from that DC Talk promo from the early 90s. We can have all these things and we can be on fire for Jesus at the same time. So Michael Tait was part of the biggest track, honestly, for DC Talk was Jesus Freak and the album of the same name. Meanwhile, with the Newsboys, who are a separate entity formed in Australia, they were also becoming really famous for being really overt about their faith. Their album, Not Ashamed, came out in, I think it was 1992, and they just grew in popularity. And so you have these two bands that really diverged, and then somehow DC Talk went on never-ending hiatus in about 2000. Newsboys sort of kept going the whole way through, and then we had this weird cataclysmic event essentially, in Christian music, it was a huge deal at the time where Peter Furler, the frontman of the Newsboys and a founding member of the Newsboys, stepped down, and Michael Tait, former member of DC Talk, was given the position of lead singer. And you nearly had this, it was like the coolest thing on earth for an evangelical Christian music superfan. I can't understate how cool that moment is, because not only did we have, I guess, the continuation of a band and a legacy that people loved and the Newsboys that had lasted at this point about 3 decades, but you also had this legacy and the incredible vocals and stage presence of Michael Tait, both artists, culture carriers. And we had that going forward into 2010 onwards, which was huge as we went into the God's Not Dead movie franchise. There was a #1 album at one point. Of course, there was some political things around that. And then we even had Newsboys United in 2018-19, which was huge, and Peter Furler and Phil Joel came back. These are huge names. The reason I'm offering you guys this episode today, it's a behind the scenes look essentially at these articles with Josiah Hesse, a behind the scenes look at what happens, answering some of your questions and what happens next. Like, what do we do next as a community? And I wanted to offer you guys an insight into a conversation that Josiah and I had, because both of us experienced the personal ramifications of this story in real time, both coming from a really similar place in our origins, but we've diverted. So as many of you guys know, I grew up in the church. I've known Jesus my whole life. Obviously, I made a decision to follow him, and that's my personal choice, but I've done a lot of faith work and faith construction within that while still staying in the church. I'm still very much in the niche of the church and in Christian music. I understand that world. I still hold the same fundamental core beliefs. Josiah, so he's from America, he's from around Colorado. He also grew up in a conservative family, and he grew up going to youth group. He loved DC Talk. You'll hear that today. And what's different about Josiah and I is that, because I lived in Australia, it's a very different climate here in terms of evangelical culture, and even the marriage of politics and religion can look very different here. But Josiah's journey, similar to mine in the way he was raised, and then he left the faith at about 24 in his early 20s. Because of that, he has this fantastic insight into evangelical culture and the church, and the aspects and the things that go into that really ingratiate us into a culture and our core beliefs, and the way that commerce and money and music come into that and politicize us. What I really appreciate about Josiah, apart from the fact that he is a fantastic journalist, I really appreciated more than anything that he was always prioritizing the well-being of his sources and the well-being particularly of the survivors. Josiah and I sort of worked for separate publications writing these stories, but we crossed paths, sort of as competition, sort of as peers and friends, and we've both sort of come to a point where this story has changed us. And the fallout of this story around Michael Tait has changed us. There will be a bunch of people potentially listening who are in the inside of Christian music, maybe who know people who've been affected directly by the story, whether it's people named or people who've worked in and around them, who will likely understandably have different opinions, and your response literally may just be, well, why are you talking about how this impacted you? Let's talk about the people it really impacted. Like, let's talk about the alleged accusers or the alleged predators. For me, I would say let's talk about the alleged survivors. Let's really prioritize them. I've spent 2.5 years in the trenches with them. They have gone through it in so many ways. So today's episode isn't to, I guess, pull away the attention from the survivors. I think we need to highlight them. They are the heroes in the story. They have not just lived and survived these experiences, but they have been incredibly courageous coming forward in different ways. Some have gone to the police, some have gone to the media, others have literally gone and healed at their own pace in their own time and decided that that's their form of healing and recovery. They didn't want this to go public. That wasn't a pun, I apologise. But that's their choice. So I want to highlight the fact that the survivors are the heroes of this story, but the collateral damage of this, the impact this has had, is rippling out, and we're seeing that more and more and more. And so today's episode is just a chance, it's an insight for you behind the scenes of the process that Josiah and I went through in reporting this and how it's affected us. It's not the be all and end all. I just want to emphasize that. I know that there are a lot of other points of view and stories to be shared and heard, but if you're ever curious about sort of the steps that it took to report this, the moral and the ethical things that we wrestled with as we went through this process, here is a sneak peek. This is a rather long but hopefully interesting conversation that I had with Josiah Hesse. You'll get to know him, his background, and let's talk more about the story. Let's go. Before we dive into today's episode, I do want to give a warning, a little ears warning, but also a warning if you have experienced sexual assault or if you find any of these topics triggering or difficult to hear. Feel free to hit pause on this, maybe come back to it later, or honestly, leave it. Whatever you need to take care of yourself is the priority. If you are in need at all of support, please feel free to call the National Suicide Helpline on 988 in Australia. That's our lifeline, 11 14 13. I've also included some links in the show notes that you can follow if you'd like some more details on that. It doesn't matter where you grew up. If you were raised in any evangelical sort of home that was exposed to Christian music, the sounds of DC Talk were likely part of your childhood or youth. And fair enough, right? When Toby McKeon, Michael Tait and Kevin Max formed the trio of DC Talk in 1987 at Liberty University, they legitimately redefined the sound of contemporary Christian music. Over the next decade and a bit, hits like Jesus Freak, Supernatural, and yes, Between You and Me, literally our namesake, shaped a generation of young evangelicals. We learned about racial equality, purity culture, and freedom of speech through the group. They were, as many people have said, akin to the Beatles of Christian music. Now, while DC Talk went on a never-ending hiatus in 2000, allowing all three singers to go their separate ways, the gravitas of DC Talk has only really grown the longer the singers were apart. People, until about June this year, were still begging for a DC Talk reunion. Toby Mac, as we know, went on to have a super successful career as a soloist, multiple award-winning albums and hits. Kevin Max carved his space as a thoughtful, melancholy poet that no one could put in a box. And Michael Tait forged a journey in the industry ranging from his band Tait in the thousands, named after his late father, to a brief stint in the rock opera I Hero, a modern-day retelling of Jesus where Tait played the Messiah character across from Rebecca St. James. Tait's biggest moment, though, since DC Talk, came in 2009 when he was announced as the lead singer of the Newsboys. Now, there are only a handful of acts in Christian music that transcend generations, and like DC Talk, Newsboys was one of them. All of a sudden, the dreams of many a youth group kid came true when Tait joined this band. He was singing classic Newsboys hits like Breakfast and Entertaining Angels, all the while fronting the formerly Aussie group with new songs coming out like God's Not Dead, Guilty and Not Ashamed. With this, Tait's career and notoriety grew once again in Christian music and evangelical circles. Successful albums and movies and a loyal fan base came with Tait's new role, until everything came to a screeching halt. That was in January this year. If you missed it, Michael Tait announced he was leaving the Newsboys in January. This was after a pretty stellar 15 years helming the lineup. Now, he stated at the time that he was entering a new season in life and everything was amicable between him and the band, but speculation abounded. It didn't help that a day before this official announcement was released, TikTok influencer Azaria Southworth actually released a viral reel telling the world that Michael Tait was gay. Now, the response within Christian music, both to Azaria and to this announcement of Tait leaving the band, was visceral. Many fans viewed Azaria's reel as an attack on Tait and the band. Meanwhile, there were some folks in CCM who simply said something around the words of, "Finally." I'm not kidding. The morning that reel went viral on TikTok, I received an influx of messages from people in the industry filled with exclamation marks and notes of, "It's finally happening." What was happening? Well, 2 years before these events took place, I attended the Dove Awards, Christian music's night of nights. And long-term listeners of the podcast may remember that episode. It was a sparkly, spangly, fast-paced environment. I was on the red carpet interviewing people, and I asked Christian singers about their favourite Aussie animal, their passion for the industry, and I genuinely tried not to get lost in a sea of voices. One of those voices was Michael Tait. I met him on that red carpet and I was legitimately stunned as he sung to me before moving on to the next interviewer. It would be a great story to say that I knew something was off in that moment, but I truly didn't. I, like many people, was so charmed by Michael Tait and the Newsboys. I was starstruck and I was really, truly relieved that my social anxiety hadn't made me look like an idiot in front of some of Christian music's finest people. But a few days later, while I was still in Nashville before I returned home to Australia, I was catching up with a friend. He wanted some help. He was like, can you do something with your podcast? This podcast. He explained to me that he'd been hearing stories about a certain person in Nashville, Tait, obviously, and he said that these stories were credible. He'd heard them firsthand. They involve situations like sexual assault. I was told that people have been trying to put a stop to this alleged behaviour at the hands of Tait for a long time, but nothing has succeeded. And apparently, these actions and behaviours were still happening today. I was also told that this was Nashville's worst kept secret. I was learning about the underbelly of Christian music firsthand. And when I was asked to take on this story, I felt compelled to say yes. If the stories I was hearing were true, this wasn't about following a lead to get clicks. It was about doing something that was right, even though it put me at odds with some of the most powerful and influential people in Christian music. After all, my sources, of whom would grow to more than 50 people when the story broke, had been risking this for years. Some had been trying to speak up for a long time, others had been advocating for help, and nothing had panned out. You see, my rationale in taking on this story was simply this. If I was the Jesus freak I was raised to be, it was my turn to practice what that meant. And I need to pick up the baton that these people, survivors, musicians, allies and advocates of these musicians had given me. It was my job now to run and see if we could do something with it. All that to say, over 2 years, I investigated Michael Tait and his time with the Newsboys. So in January, when Azaria dropped that TikTok reel about Tait's sexuality, I legitimately panicked. For starters, I couldn't figure out the motive behind Azaria's reel. Now, Azaria has since talked about this extensively and his point of view. You can find that in a link in our show notes. But beyond this, I knew that if this went viral, there was a larger chance of me being found out by Tait and the Newsboys, I believe potentially jeopardising the story, and I was legitimately afraid that I'd be outscooped by another reporter, especially considering the comment section had begun alluding to accusations about Tait regarding alleged sexual assault. Enter Josiah Hesse. Now, Josiah, as I would find out in the coming weeks, was an established freelancer based in Colorado, specialising in topics like religion, politics and health. His work has been featured in The Guardian, Vice and Politico. He has published a series of Gothic books and received praise for a non-fiction work, Runner's High, where he explored the medical effects of cannabis while running. Now, like many of us, Josiah grew up in a conservative evangelical family. He loved DC Talk, like I love Zoe Girl or Super Chick. He knew that Tait being outed was a huge moment in evangelical culture, and he started chasing leads. When this happened, January 2025, I was approximately 90% done with my investigation, but I hadn't clinched it yet. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect before we published. So with Josiah on my tail, I went into overdrive. We soon both figured out who each other was. We realised Tait knew these stories were happening, and we were both trying to get the other story down before the other publication did. If that sounds confusing, it was. It was a really stressful time. Now, ironically, in April, I would actually call Josiah, and we considered working together. For what it's worth, I really liked Josiah straight away. Journalism is competitive, but he was respectful, candid while still professional, and he clearly cared for his alleged victims. Long story short, Josiah and I didn't end up collaborating, but our stories would work in tandem with one another. My first piece about Tait came out June 4 with the Roy's Report, a Christian investigative publication. In it, I detailed the stories of 3 men who told me they were allegedly sexually assaulted by Tait between the years of 2005 and 2014. All 3 of them were 22 at the time. On June 5, the Newsboys released a statement on social media confirming that Tait had admitted to leading a double life in January prior to his departure. Their statement confirmed my reporting for many people, and we picked up enough media attention that on June 10, Michael Tait published his own confession on social media. Now, in his confession, which I will link in the show notes, Tait confessed to struggling with addiction, living a double life, and having participated in the unwanted touching of men. Then, on June 13, Josiah released a piece with The Guardian detailing the stories of multiple men, more men, who state they had also been sexually assaulted by Tait, experienced unwanted sexual advances, and in some cases had allegedly been drugged by him. Now, Hayley Williams of Paramore, yes, that Hayley Williams, saw the Guardian article and she posted about it on Instagram, and soon media across the globe was reporting on our work. Over the coming months, Josiah and I would report on many more stories of multiple survivors. We would both cover different decades in Tait's career and life. And currently there is actually a preliminary investigation underway through the Brentwood Police Department in Nashville, where Tait resides. However, no formal charges have been placed. Now, a few months ago, in the midst of all of this, I caught up with Josiah to compare notes in our reporting. We talked about what happened, how it affected us, and what is next. I hope that as you hear our conversation, you get a bit of an insight into our process in reporting, our motivation behind it, and what we hope comes out of it next. Here's a sneak peek behind the curtain. Now, before I go on, we do need to clarify what the worst kept secret in Nashville actually means. Because I've had so many people say to me, Jessica, I had no idea Michael Tait was gay, or everyone knew this, or everyone knew he was allegedly sexually assaulting people, or no one knew he was sexually assaulting people. If someone said it, I have heard it, I promise you. And more often than not, that person is utterly convinced they are correct, because that is exactly their experience. So let me fill you in on what the quote-unquote worst kept secret was. I use that as a quote based on what multiple sources said to me. I guess you could say, for the vast majority of my sources and my read on the industry, the worst kept secret was perhaps Michael Tait was gay. Now, when I say that, I want to tread really carefully and respectfully, because the fact is that a person's sexuality is their own business. Their identity is their own business, and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're Michael Tait or whether you're someone I've never heard of on the street. I don't have a right, I believe, to interrogate you about your sexuality. When people sort of say the worst kept secret in Nashville was that Michael Tait was gay, a lot of it was speculation. So a lot of people saw his behaviour and assumed. Others heard rumours about certain behaviour and were like, yep, so he must be gay. The fact is, we have to say this fact. Michael Tait has never told the world publicly what his sexuality is. That's totally his call and that's his choice. Granted, in light of the discoveries that we've made through these stories, his sexuality has come into the spotlight, and you could make a case to say, well, we need to discuss it because all these XYZ events have happened. But you see, as I've been uncovering the story, I've wanted to be really, really clear. There is a difference between your sexual orientation and acts that are non-consensual, that are assault, and that could be criminal. Those two are completely separate things. As I talk about Nashville's worst kept secret, the general consensus seemed to be that Michael Tait was gay. Who actually heard that firsthand? That's up for debate, but that was the general consensus. Then, the other worst kept secret I heard about, which other people refer to it as, is actually a different, I would say, echelon or level of power in Christian music. You see, in my mind, I view the Christian music to have approximately 2 power levels, and some of it has to do with the era, some of it has to do with your age, some of it has to do with wealth, and some of it just has to do with your social circles and interests, honestly. It's not an indication of people being better than others. I would say in one echelon, you have people like Michael Tait. You have the greats in Christian music, people who have been doing this for decades. They know each other, they've been doing it together for years. I think of them, and they're the ones that your parents loved and you probably loved and maybe your kid loved, right? Like, they cross generations. Then you have, I would say, another echelon in Christian music, another segment, if you will, and I actually think of them as nearly a younger, more vulnerable group. I say that because these people generally don't have as much clout as the people in the other group, the stalwarts who have honestly forged the industry and made it what it is today. They have built the constructs, so they hold the power. Then you have these other people who are more up-and-coming bands, or they were. And when I think of those people, they are more of your noughties and 2010s groups, right? And I'm thinking like Reliant K, Switchfoot, Super Chick, 10th Avenue North. I mean, think of a group that was sort of big in that time that you don't sort of think as like a iconic Christian musician, but they were probably really significant for you. Some of those people are still in Christian music, and a lot of them have left Christian music and gone into other realms, largely because they went through a whole lot of stuff when they were teenagers in the Christian music industry. And so we have these two realms, and what I found when I talk about Nashville's Worst Kept Secret and Michael Tait is that both of these realms had two different versions of that secret. The people who had more power or were in that world of the more stalwarts and people who built Christian music, likely the secret probably was that Michael Tait was gay. For people who weren't in that, who were more up and comers, who maybe were support acts for people like DC Talk or the Newsboys, or who were crew at the time and then rose in ranks, they're the ones generally who seem to have heard the worst kept secret about sexual assaults. And that is because my understanding is that a lot of the survivors would share these stories with their close friends, and a lot of them would share them on the road, in green rooms, in the van, on all these places, because that was their safe place. And because of that, you nearly have two different types of secrets in Nashville and how people interpret it. Friends, welcome to the Between You and Me podcast. Today I am very excited to have my colleague / friend Josiah Hesse with us. How are you, Josiah?
I'm good. How you doing?
Not too bad. Sorry, we already sound like a morning chat show, and that's terribly sad. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, you're based in Colorado, right?
That's right, in Denver.
Yeah, nice. Okay. I know that only because every time I look up the time zones that we're going to chat, I have to check that one. So that makes perfect sense. Now, for friends who haven't heard of you before, they've very, very likely read your work because, one, you're a fantastic freelance journalist and author. And I will say that. You haven't paid me to say that. But also you are the author of the pieces in The Guardian, breaking the Michael Tait stories and the Newsboys stories in The Guardian. So we have a fair bit in common in that respect. But I also know that at least in my experience in journalism world, if that exists, it's not always often people competing for a scoop to be friends. So I was very excited to have you on today to chat, one, about you and your sort of your background, but also to ask you some questions that listeners have been sending my way about these stories. Because I know that we have had sort of a similar experience, but your background and the fact that you're publishing with a different place means that you've had some slightly different sort of perspectives. So I thought it'd be far more fun to ask these questions and learn from you as we go.
I'm excited. Let's do it.
Yeah. So no, you're good. So for starters, for people who haven't met you before, and I say this to every guest, but please, can you explain yourself, define yourself in some way, in 30 seconds, how would you introduce yourself to the world? No pressure or anything. That's not hard.
An epitaph for me. I'm a writer from Denver, Colorado, for the last 20 years at least. I grew up in a small town in North Iowa called Clear Lake, the town that killed Buddy Holly. And I've been writing most of my life about a lot of different things, science, pop culture, politics, technology, cannabis, being in Colorado, mental health. But the Christian right has taken a pretty large swath of my reporting over the last 20 years. And I wrote a couple of psychological horror novels about evangelical Christianity. The series is called Carnality. And yeah, that's me on a headstone.
That was really well done. Nicely done. I stumble over my words, so you're doing great. I need to read that book series. That sounds absolutely fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you stepped into, I guess, the Michael Tait stories, to put it bluntly? You released a story with The Guardian, I think it was about June 13, and you're the first, you named sources, which is absolutely incredible. I think there were maybe 6 men involved, 2 alleging sexual abuse by being basically date raped, essentially, allegedly, and a couple of minors in there as well. So how did the story come across your desk, for lack of a better term, and how did you start writing this?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but, before I start, I have to give you some credit for really breaking the story. I came along maybe
we were
like 9
competing for
days
that
later.
break. So that's
Yeah. Yeah, I think you broke the story. Tait's confession, quote unquote, came out the next day, a couple days later. And we had been working on it, me and the investigative team at The Guardian, for months leading up to that. And that was like an oh my God moment that whole week that, your story's coming out in the confession. It was just moving so fast. And at the same time, we had, for the most part, completely different sources. You didn't really like steal my thunder in any way, because when the Guardian story came out, it built on the reporting that you'd done, and then you had a story come out like 2 weeks later that built on that, and then I had one come out in July. But yeah, to get to the initial question, I grew up like a lot of evangelical kids as a massive DC Talk fan. I had their posters on my wall. I went to their concerts. I hung out in alleys to get their autographs after shows. I was a super fan up until the age of 16 or 17. I think I got into like Christian punk rock, the Tooth and Nail stuff after that, and then eventually got into the secular world of Radiohead and REM and Bjork. But they really were like my first. I mean, maybe Carmen was my first pop star that I was obsessed with.
Yeah.
Yeah. But DC Talk were the pop group that like made the mold for me. And so fast forward like 30 years, and I had been reporting on the Christian right for a long time leading up to this. I'd written about DC Talk a great deal in books and articles, and then it was when Azariah Southworth's TikTok video dropped, where, it's kind of controversial. He outs Michael Tait as gay. He'd been allegedly closeted his whole life, and that upset some people, but it was only like the next day that he had a follow-up post, follow-up video, where he said, look, guys, I've been getting loads of messages from people alleging sexual assault from Michael Tait. And so I reached out to Azariah and talked to him a little bit about it. And then some of the victims were public or like semi-public about the allegations. They were like doing videos, in a mask with an altered voice, but I could like find them on the internet. It just kept snowballing from there. Speaking to one or two people led to 3 or 4, which led to like 10. I'm not saying like initially 10 victims, but people who had stories, people who knew things. It was an overwhelming number of people who'd be like, I've been hearing about this for years, or I know someone who's experienced this ages ago, and I've been waiting for the story to break. And I flew to Nashville and got to know some of the victims, and got pretty embedded in the story in a way that I really haven't, I don't think ever before, really. Just spending so much time with the victims, and with a story like this, you have to corroborate so much, as so you have to go detail by detail with them through their story. You got to talk to people who they'd talk to at the time about what had happened. It's a endless series of phone calls. Eventually got it out, and it's still, maybe it's a pretentious thing to say, but how actors talk about a role still being with them after they finished rapping. Like, this story is very much still with me, and in some ways that's good as a journalist, but in some ways it's very uncomfortable.
I resonate with that. Yeah, I resonate with that a lot.
Spotlight, hot nights, glow red in the stoplight. I slay, big swerve, big wheel, rich taste. I serve, line up for the looks that kill. So rich it can make you ill. Don't choke on the diamond pill. Cheap lines, get a gag like ew. Go fetch, that color, mad cash, high dollar. Just watch, don't follow. Shake, set the world on fire. Bow down to the golden strand. Get in line, I'm in high demand. Come close, yeah, I'll use what I can when I can. I will rate with a 1 to a 10. I will call if I want it again.
What's really interesting to me about your part, like your side of this story, is that you had, like when you were younger, this deep love for DC Talk. And I was not the opposite, but I grew up knowing about DC Talk. I knew about the Newsboys. They were just sort of part of Christian, like, law, I guess, that I grew up in. I heard them on Christian radio, but I was never like a huge fan. I was just like, they're there. I went for the girl bands and for like, and later on there was like Super Chick and Reliant K and all, like that was sort of my jam. But I knew that the Newsboys came from Australia, and I knew that obviously DC Talk was just like the band. That sort of was and the idea of being a Jesus freak just permeated into my language. I was that kid at school. And so what I really value about your perspective is that you've said to me before, we've compared notes, that you actually felt like you could have been like lived in some of these situations, these stories. You've been to these festivals, and have a first-hand knowledge of them in a way that I could only really observe from Australia or learn about from other sources. And because of that, I was so grateful that you were spearheading some of these stories, because you could tell them in a way that I couldn't. But can you tell me, like, knowing that you, growing up, had this deep love and were in alleyways for DC Talk autographs, how did that impact the actual reporting on this? Because I know now it's decades later, you're a journalist, you know how to, like, compartmentalize, and life has changed since those days. But there's still an element of nostalgia, right? There's still an element where you're like, what? Damn, this is the band that I loved and looked up to as a kid. Like, how do you process that?
Yeah, well, and I mean, you're absolutely right that I have changed a lot since then. I don't have the same worldview or mentality. I don't have the same morals that I did then. Not that I'm amoral now, but music, and especially with memory, has a way of penetrating very deep. And, anyone knows, like, if you listen to a song today that you really loved when you're 14, you can go back there, like in your mind, in your heart, in your body, in your nervous system, or at least I can. I think it's somewhat of a universal experience. And even if you recognize, like, oh, this song's actually really corny, I wouldn't show this to someone, like, you got to hear this song. It's going to blow your mind. It's going to change your life. But you can listen to it. And I go running a lot, and I listen to music, and a lot of that music I wouldn't share with other people. And a lot of it is CCM from the 80s and 90s, but it still hits me in that same spot that it did when I was 14, 15. And yeah, I grew up in the Midwest, in North Iowa, which was, kind of the northern part of the Bible Belt, maybe like the belly button of the Bible Belt, if I can use a triple or quadruple alliteration. And, loads of bands were coming through there. I was going to Sunshine Festival. I was seeing a lot of bands, but they were the definition of cool in my mind. And, setting aside like the time that's passed, some of those songs are really good. Even newer stuff, I maintain that the song God's Not Dead is a banger. I think it's been used for very nefarious political purposes, but it's a great tune. And, those songs are still with me. And I still think about them, and I still, write about them and report about them and think about them from different ways. But yeah, they're still in my heart. And that was something I shared with a lot of the victims. But there was also something that was very different between me and them, is that a lot of them were Nashville born and raised, like they lived behind the curtain of CCM. So they saw these people at the grocery store. Their parents were friends. They just moved in these circles, kind of like somebody who grew up in Hollywood. It's not mind-blowing to them to see a famous movie star walking down the sidewalk. Some of them had a kind of cynical edge, and I don't mean that as a criticism, but just like a yeah, where have you been kind of attitude about
Yes.
this industry, the what's going on behind the scenes of this industry, which is very different from how I grew up. In that, like, I grew up on the other side of the curtain as a fan. So these guys were as pure as the driven snow in my eyes. And that was the case with some of the victims as well. I don't want to paint them all as like hardened cynics who grew up in the music scene, but we also could connect with that shared love of the music and the shifts that I think a lot of young believers go through. And somewhat of a tangent, but I maintain that it's different if you came to evangelical Christianity as an adult versus you were born into it and it was all you ever knew. And you go through different phases. I think they're the same phases that everyone goes through when they grow up and they see the world one way. 5 years pass, they see it a little differently. 5 years and so on. You view this theology differently, and that was something I shared with some of these guys as well. Like, it's not as simplistic as it looked when we were 12 years old, when we were suddenly 18. But like me, when they were in the presence of Michael Tait, it was in the holiest of holies. Like, they were floored. They couldn't help be. Even the cynical ones were just like, well, there he is, like in the flesh. And he wants to be my friend. He wants to hang out. He wants to jam. He wants to hear my demo. He wants to have me over at parties. He wants to introduce me to people. This is game changer. And a lot of them had ambitions to be in the music industry. And that was something that was, I mean, I don't want to presume to know what was in Tait's mind, but it kind of seems like it was used as a tool of manipulation for some of them, the promises that he was making. It made it difficult to maintain that journalistic distance that I've always prided myself on. And in some ways it's, it's difficult for me to admit, because the natural question is, like, you've written about, refugees from Venezuela. You've written about mass shootings. I think like 4 different mass shootings. Like, you didn't feel this way about those victims. And I'm not saying I don't feel anything when I go and report on a mass shooting, but it's all so much bigger. It's the world is paying attention, and there's all these other elements coming in. And for this, it felt, at least for a long time leading up to the publication, as like a very intimate story. Like, these handful of guys were trusting me with the stories of their lives, because you have to put a little bit of a biography in there, but also like their most tender, dark moments and their feelings about it and how it's still affecting them today. And, I think I did still do the job as a journalist. I don't believe that I ever let it interfere with being fair and due diligence and making sure that you're checking all your boxes and, being as transparent as possible. But it's something that got into my dreams. It's something that got into my therapy sessions. And it did come on the heels of writing a book about my childhood experiences with evangelical Christianity and a lot of my trauma that was very difficult to write. And I finished that up, and it's like, hey, here's another, load of horror for you to jump into head first. And I was excited to do it. The journalist in me was like, this is a big story that you have to follow up on. At least that was my initial feeling about it. Like I said, as I got to know these guys and got to know all these stories, it became something different.
What you think about that? What you think about anything? What you think about you? What you think about me? What you think about that? What you think about that? What you think about anything? What I'm faking all the moves. I know everything that comes between us puts you in the mood. I get so sick and tired of following all your rules. The next time you walk away, I'm gonna let you stew.
I kind of want it to be over, and at the same time, I don't feel like I've reached the end of the story.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
I imagine you can relate to.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like you were saying, and you've expressed to me before, you make one phone call with someone, you hear their story, which some of the stories we've both heard are just, you just can't fathom them, and how someone has sort of lived with that for years. You hear that, you call someone to corroborate the story, and then they have their own story, and you've got to, and so you follow this trail that never seems to stop, because there's always some people that you can't get in contact with, or there's another story that you just don't have time to follow up because you are already working with however many other stories of serious gravity that you want to do your due diligence to, and actually like really care for those sources, make sure that you're ticking the boxes as a journalist, that you're doing it ethically. And it feels like this story and Tait's reach and his impact has been so great that there will never be, like, in my mind anyway, there'll never be a full semblance of just how far this goes, and how it's permeated, not just, I guess, in alleged victims, but in like cover up, or has there been cover up? Well, why has it happened, and who knew something, and who was just complicit, who chose to be ignorant? Can you choose to be ignorant? Like, sorry. So just there's so many layers to this, and then for me as well, when you get to the personal level of it, like we both have our backgrounds growing up in this really conservative Christian culture. So even though like our backgrounds are different, our stories are different, somehow we've both ended up in this. For me, it really feels serendipitous, this bizarre spot where we're both covering the story from different points of view, but they've complemented each other. To actually, at least, it really feels like with you, at least we've covered more of the expanse of this. This is so big. We've both been able to sort of play a part in doing that and giving voice to some of those victims who've wanted to speak up. And so for me, it does. I'm also like, I don't know where it ends. I know there has to be a level professionally and even personally where I have to put a stopper to it, because it's like, I need to take care of myself, because we can't keep rolling with these stories forever as a journalist. And there's other things to do. There's other important work to do that you and I both need to get to in other spheres of life. But it does feel like something that is, at least for me, and maybe it's also because of my background and because of my beliefs, it does become all consuming. I've also spent countless therapy sessions talking about this. And I remember there was one where I was struggling, because a core belief for me is I believe in a good God, and I believe that everyone is made in the image of a good God. And I believe that before I believe in the fall or anything like that. And one of the things I've wrestled with the most in this I can see that good in the victims. I can see that in them and everything they've gone through. But I've really had to wrestle in my mind with not just making other people the enemy or the evil. I have to really differentiate that, and perhaps that's because of my belief system, but that's something I've really grappled with as I've also had dreams and like things like that. And so it nearly becomes all consuming, and nearly for me has become a place of like my beliefs have weaved in and defined so much of how I do this, but I've also had to pull them apart. And nearly, I wouldn't say, people use the term deconstruction at the moment. I don't feel like I feel like it's something I did in the past. I've certainly thought really carefully about my belief system and how it impacts my work. And I feel really clear in that. But I've seen this really walk hand in hand with the beliefs and even that unhealthy and toxic beliefs that I had as a kid. And I've really, like you, had to work to pull them out and be like, wow, why am I leaning into this again? Or why am I seeing this play out so vividly in someone 20 or 30 years older than me when I thought that I dealt with that when I was like 22? Like it's this weird dichotomy where you're really glimpsing into this world that you know so intimately, but you don't live in fully anymore. And that's why it really feels like there's this whole suction between, especially when new stories come. And I don't know about you, but I also feel a ton of pressure from people in that world. They want more stories. They're like, where's more? It's like sometimes it really feels like they think we're holding things back from them. And I'm really like, you really think that I'm purposely holding things back from you? If I can corroborate it, like if I can do the work, you're going to hear it. But it's really like becomes a responsibility. And then at least from the evangelical church, because I'm sort of one of them, it really feels like a responsibility that they've then placed on you to serve them something. And part of me thinks the whole time, why didn't someone else do this before we did? It took 30, 40 years. Why did someone not do this beforehand? Or why didn't it get over the line if they were trying? And that's the part that I can't process. And that was a very roundabout answer to your question. But yeah, that was the thing, is I can't figure out why. I'm glad that we had the privilege of doing this and the honor of doing this, even though it's cost us an awful lot. But I don't know why it fell to us who feel like the two misfit kids in this Christian culture, when there are people in the middle of it who should have had more power or authority to deal with this X amount of years ago. That's where I keep falling to. I'm like, why is this us? Why did we get this job? That's what I can't make sense of.
Well, I thought about that a lot. Since I report on this world, but I'm reporting for a secular audience that reads The Guardian, I'm dealing with a lot of editors who have no frame of reference for any of this. And that's true for all the publications that I've written for. Like, I have to educate them on who these characters are and why they're worth reporting on, which is not something you typically have to do with a journalist or as a journalist. With editors, usually you bring them something unique, but they have some kind of frame of reference for it, no matter what it is. If it's science, if it's celebrity, they're at least familiar enough to get the pitch. And I was talking with one of the victims about this, who grew up kind of working class, poor, and went to a lot of youth groups and Christian events. And I think I've never really seen, well, there is some data on income of evangelicals. I believe it's the majority of them are in working class income bracket in America. Might have that slightly wrong. Somebody can check me on that in the comments. But a lot of them were coming from poor backgrounds where you go to youth group as kind of a babysitter, a kind of after school event. Something my mom did. She always used a phrase like to keep you off the streets. To keep you safe. And kids who grew up in more affluent backgrounds, they had tennis lessons after school. They had tutors. They had, golf trips or whatever. I don't know. They had people in their lives working with them. And a lot of poor parents sent their kids to these rock concerts or youth groups thinking that this is where they're safe and this is where they'll get a good education. And that same guy who was one of the victims, I talked to his mother and I asked her, like, what did you think about this guy? He was like, 35 years old, and he's hanging out with your 17-year-old son. And she's like, well, I thought it was great because he was a troubled kid. And, here's this Christian man. He's very affluent and successful, and he wants to take my son under his wing and be his mentor. Like, that's fantastic. And I think that was the mentality of a lot of parents who sent their kids into the arms of this industry. And I'm not saying that they're all, predators. I'm just saying, like, this is how predators get away with it. It's the same thing that happened in the Catholic Church. These priests were so revered that they were just beyond reproach. And, it's interesting hearing you talk about your journey as a journalist covering this for Julie Roy's, because there's a lot of overlap, a lot of similarities in our journeys. But this is one where we're kind of in an inverse dynamic, because I am quite cynical about this industry and about evangelicals and the Christian right and what goes on behind closed doors, and report a lot on sex scandals of evangelical leaders today and from the past. And so I had to fight that side of me that is the cynical, hardened, secular journalist that I know if I lean too much into that, it's going to discredit my reporting in the eyes of the people who really matter. I mean, everyone matters, but like people who could really make changes in this industry. If I come off as some like atheist, professorial, finger wagging, they're all full of it kind of, hipster guy, then it'll be easy to discredit my reporting. It'll be really, I will have embodied the characters from the God's Not Dead movies, which are full of, yeah, especially in the first one. There's the gal who's the journalist. I think the publication she writes for is called The New Left. And she like runs up to the Duck Dynasty guy at the beginning of the movie and shoves a microphone in his face. And she's like, "How dare you proclaim the name of God every night on your television show to millions of Americans?" And it's like, that is the worst representation of a journalist I can ever conjure, and it reminds me a lot of the Passion plays and Hell Houses I was in as a kid.
Yes!
That kind of horrible dialogue that we had to do, and I didn't want to be that, so I really had to put aside that part of me that is just constantly rolling his eyes and being like, yeah, they're all sitting behind closed doors. They're all lying, because there was just so much more at stake than any sort of like sassy editorial from me about this world. Like I really needed to temper all of that and just listen to the victims and tell it straight.
Yeah.
So much more than a roll of the dice to think I could miss out on all of this light. Now I'm just playing for keeps. The day that I met you, I fell in so deep. Oh, it isn't a game. Love isn't a game. No, love isn't a game. It isn't a game. It's much more than a turn of the cards to think
that God's not dead. That is a repeating echo. It feels like any objection to, I guess. To be really careful how I say this, but any objection, I guess, to at least like the Christian nationalism, evangelical, like really far right, anything that sort of is portrayed in the God's Not Dead movies, it nearly seems like that is nearly used now as anyone who critiques evangelical culture is now the enemy, is now like the oppressor, is now the left, like, which... Honestly, I lean left, so I'm like, that's not wrong. But like all of these things, it feels like everything that comes against or critiques good journalism, that critiques evangelical culture, is seen as an attack and an oppression, but also this weird thing that has also come through it that I've heard through multiple sources is that it can also be viewed as like a spiritual attack on these people, on these bands. And I mean, we've both grown up in that world. We've both been in spots where we've probably believed that. I used to go to bed every night as a kid saying the name of Jesus because I was terrified something was going to, like, that was sort of what we grew up in, right? And now I'm like, you think I'm that? Like, and that's the part for me, because I'm still part of this community a little bit. That's the part where I have to really not center it on myself, because it's not about me. It's about this, like the survivors and the victims. But it's this really weird thing where, as a journalist and as humans, in an individual level, we believe in accountability. And it's a bit like, well, why shouldn't there also be accountability in every other facet and stream of life, but more, especially more than others, surely the religious realm, because there's even meant to be higher levels of morals. And so that narrative of oppression and persecution in Nashville, because of our work and the work of other journalists or even people speaking up, has been this really not unexpected but bizarre facet of this particular job, this particular project that hasn't come up in the past for me. Because I'm not sure what other sects, unless you're reporting maybe on a cult, this would come up and they'd say, oh, it's a spiritual attack. You're a part of something else that's big. Like, and that's the really bizarre part for me, because that's where my personal belief system and my childhood trauma also comes into play. And I have to pull that apart. And so I really understand and really respect your, like, I can't go too hard into the cynicism, because what I've found through this reporting, especially in the last couple of months, is that it's so much easier to fall into that cynic, because I've been so disappointed by the response of people to this story, which I imagine you probably expected, but I was so hopeful that there'd be a better response, more accountability taken, not just a confession, but actual, like, here are rules and procedures and here are policies of reporting things to people who will actually pay attention to them, things like that. And I had this maybe naive hope that people of influence would speak up more than what they have and not just give some platitude of it's not all Christian music. And that's been probably one of the most difficult parts of this process for me, because I was resisting the cynicism so hard through this whole story. And in some days it feels like it's handed to you on a platter and you're like, I don't know how to, like, that's the hardest part for me. And so I really respect the fact that you were holding that, but also working not against it, but really centering the victims before yourself.
Yeah.
Because I nearly feel like I had to do the reverse. I had to, like, but like, you were cynical and I saw too much good and was too hopeful. And it's nearly this coming through the middle. And that's, again, where I'm just really grateful for your reporting, because I think there's a compliment to it that I couldn't offer, and now that I'm learning and working through my own counselling. So that's just something that I keep giving you props, but because I'm really grateful for your work. I wanted to ask you something that people have brought to me. They say, why did no one address this in the past? Why? We've called it Nashville's worst kept secret. It's sort of something that came up among different sources, I think, for both of us. The idea that everyone in Nashville knows something about Michael Tait, but it's never been public knowledge. It's never made it past to the audience who see him a certain way. Why, in your perspective, do you think, one, what do you think the secret was? And two, why do you think no one spoke out about it until now?
Well, I think there's multiple things that people mean when they say, like, it was an open secret in Nashville. I think some people are saying, like, it was an open secret that Michael Tait was gay, that he was closeted, that he had a boyfriend, that he was going to gay clubs when his bands were on the road. And then other people, when they say it was an open secret, they mean the assaults, or varying degrees between all of that. Like, oh yeah, he's got these young guys coming over to his house all the time. It's pretty weird. People talk about it, but nobody knows anything. And I'm saying, like, that's one person's perspective. Like, so there's many different things people mean when they say it was an open secret. But yeah, it's a fascinating question of why this remained secret for so long. I mean, we've seen it in the Me Too movement in the secular world, where Bill Cosby got away with a whole lot for decades. So did Harvey Weinstein. I think what was true about those stories is like 100 times more in this industry, that they were so powerful, that so many people were making money off of them. They were so revered. And maybe one or two people had come forward, but they weren't believed. Because how could they, how could he do this? Not Michael Tait, just like surely not Bill Cosby. He's America's dad. He would never drug and rape young women. What you said earlier also kind of explains the why this remained secret for so long, that any sort of accountability or investigation into this culture, into this world, gets met with that spiritual attack label, or they're trying to bring down Christianity in America. This is Trump's big thing, is anti-Christian bias. And so whenever any journalist does start to probe into this world, you're dealing with a lot more than holding a powerful person to account, which is kind of our job, one aspect of our job. And it's been going on, for well, God knows how long, but like just looking at the last 60 years of the Christian right, when civil rights legislation came through, it's like, oh, they're forcing our churches and schools to integrate. And so then they create these segregationist academies. Jerry Falwell had one, Bob Jones University. And then the IRS says, like, well, we're not going to give you tax-free status if you're not following the civil rights law. And then, the government is coming after us. Like, this is prophesied in Revelation. And, that's the context, that's the damage control, that's the publicity spin that they put on it. And it's very, very effective. And that was on my mind when I was reporting this. I didn't have that hope that you did, that there would be change. I thought there's a potential for these victims to be attacked, and certainly a potential for me to be attacked. I started like taking more precautions on my computer. I started talking to my sources via WhatsApp. And I thought in my head, I was like, there's a lot of money that's going to come after me. It's going to come after these victims. They're going to try and bury this story. They've likely done it before. I'm not saying who the they in this is, but I think we both agree there is some kind of they around Michael Tait. It's not just him that's labored to keep this thing a secret. I'm not pointing fingers at any one person or group of people, but there's definitely had to have been fixers in this. And I have actually been surprised by what I would view as the positive aspects of this, because I haven't seen anyone, and maybe it's happened, but I just haven't seen it, say that this is all bullshit. These guys are lying. They're making it up. They want attention. They want money. Michael Tait is above reproach. He is the man we've always known him to be. I think that still could have happened if Tait hadn't put out that confession. I mean, it was a good thing to do from an ethical standpoint, but I don't think it was a good thing to do from a publicity standpoint, because I just haven't seen anyone come to his defense beyond saying, like, we've all sinned. We all need forgiveness. This isn't all of CCM. This isn't all of evangelical Christianity or conservative Christianity. But nothing to his defense, nothing saying that these are lies. And that has really shocked me. And I think we're just dealing with a very different ecosystem in this world, because there hasn't been a Julie Roys really throughout its history. And that's why, to heap some praise on you, that's why I was so, happy that you were doing the work that you were doing, and for the outlet that you were doing it for, because you're inside the tent, you're inside the culture, the industry. This isn't like the cynical leftists that are coming to point fingers and mock people. From what I get from Julie Roys is that there's an attempt to save Christianity, to save evangelical Christianity, to save these institutions by rooting out this bad behavior. And that hasn't existed in the secular, mainstream media for this industry. Just to tie back what I was saying earlier about like a lot of working class kids going to these concerts, I saw a statistic recently that 80% of journalists come from a professional or middle upper class or upper class background. So most of them are to some degree separated from this world. And not to say there aren't wealthy people in mega churches. There certainly are. And there are certain wealthy people in politics and leadership, but I don't think there's the appetite for hard-hitting journalism rooting out problems within their own world, at least from outsiders. And that's why I think Julie Roys is different, because it's, I would hope, something that they could trust and believe, and it's not just an attack on Christianity. Yeah. You know what I mean?
can find me in miracles. Oh, you can find me in miracles. Oh.
Before we finish, you've been so generous with your time. Please, can you tell us more about your book, when you expect it to release, and a bit about why everyone should read it? I will tell them to read it, but why should everyone read it?
Well, when the time comes, which is January 13th, I would love all your listeners to read it. It is available for pre-order now if people are so inclined. The name of the book is On Fire for God: Fear, Shame, Poverty, and the Making of the Christian Right, a Personal History. Bit of a mouthful in that title. It's a book that throughout its creation took on a much grander scope than when I first began it. But basically, it looks at 100 years of the Christian right in America, and particularly its manipulation of working class believers. So I look at things like the Scopes trial and the KKK, and then up through Billy Graham's revivals and the Sawdust Trail, and the beginning of early mega churches, and one had formed in my hometown. And there was a fun coincidence that my hometown, the one that neighbors Clear Lake, Mason City, they're basically side by side, was where the Music Man musical comes from. I don't know if that's popular in Australia.
Yeah, I've heard of that, yeah.
But yeah, that's about my hometown, written by someone from my hometown. It became a kind of allegory that wove its way throughout the whole book, because it's about a traveling salesman coming to town, getting everyone afraid of a pool table. It's this fear of urban vice, of sin that's coming for town, coming for your daughters, and getting everyone afraid. And then he's like, you know what the solution is? A boys band, and he sells them the uniforms and the instruments, but he doesn't know anything about making music. He doesn't know what the instruments do. He's just pulling this grift from town to town. And it kind of became an allegory for all of these stories that I would tell throughout the last 100 years, particularly in my hometown. And I've woven my family's narrative in through that, starting with my great grandparents, and then all the way up. I think it's like 130 pages in before I'm even born.
It's amazing.
And yeah, so it is a memoir, but there's a lot more in there. It's like probably 40% journalism and 60% memoir. And there's a lot of dark stuff about my childhood, things that I'd never even told anyone before. I have this strange proclivity of feeling comfortable writing things and publishing them before I will actually talk about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you as well?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
I don't know. It's a realm that I feel comfortable in. And I'm a really big fan of Stephen King and horror novels and movies, and was raised on them. And that had a kind of through line with the evangelical world that I grew up in, the Frank Peretti books, the Hell Houses, the Left Behind books, the Rapture films. Oh, the very first Rapture film, A Thief in the Night, was filmed in Des Moines, Iowa. And my parents were a part of that scene.
Oh,
and
man.
So
that
there was so
runs
much
deep.
that I had to pull from.
Yeah.
I think, I had a draft once that was like 800 pages long, and my editor was just like aghast, like, we got to cut this down several times over. But I'm like, there's so much to get into. So yeah, it comes out January 13th. I'll be doing a book tour shortly after that, going through the Midwest and the West and the Pacific Northwest of America. No current plans to make it to Australia, but
I'm so disappointed in that, but one day.
Yeah, one day.
One day. Well, thank you for sharing your story, not just in the podcast, but also in your book. I haven't read it yet, but I know somewhat what a big deal it is. But also, I think there's an even bigger element of it for you, because we've talked about, for both of us growing up, we've taken different paths, but you sharing your story and how you've, I don't know, it feels like to me like you've taken the absolute worst broken parts of your life, which I don't know about, but you've taken them and you've used them for justice, and just really to be define yourself as Josiah, which I know just feels like a really simplistic thing to say, but it's really clear for me through your work and what I expect in your book is that you have really fought to make your mark on this world on your terms. And I have so much respect for that because you've had to push through a whole lot of stuff and indoctrination that I think nearly every Christian kid goes through, but you've pushed through that and still somehow managed to use that to then speak truth and life into the world. And I have so much respect for that as a journalist and as a human. So thank you. I know that was a long episode, right? But it feels like topics like this, especially ones that you guys have participated in. We've had conversations about the highs and lows of Christian music, about the underbelly of it for years. And as these stories have broken, you have engaged, you've been reading them. A lot of you have been really heartbroken. You've had lots of questions. A lot of you have been grieving. I know that there are a ton of people who, if I can use the term deconstructing, but like pulling apart their idea of Christian fame and celebrity and media, and even worship music and how we use that in church, because this has really, it's revealed, I guess, a part of the industry and the culture that most people just aren't aware of. And it's heartbreaking on multiple levels, truly. I am also really proud of us as a community. I consider myself part of this sort of community of evangelicals, of Jesus followers in this realm who appreciate music. I'm really proud of us for, I guess, digging deep in this moment, instead of trolling, instead of victim blaming, and instead of slandering people. I think a lot of people have really done a lot of self-reflection and really looked at their faith and their childhood and what these things meant to them growing up and what does that mean now in light of our new knowledge. And that's really heartbreaking, grievous work, but it's really necessary work. And I know that for lots of people still in the contemporary Christian music industry, there's been a ton of reflection, there's been a ton of grief and heartbreak, and a lot of stress. Truly a lot of stress as we figure out what's next, what do we do? And I think as I talked about that with Josiah, the what's next really looks different for each individual person. You would have heard my disillusionment when I was talking to Josiah then. That was a few months ago. There were good weeks and bad weeks with this story in terms of comments and people's feedback to it. And sometimes it can really get to you. My grand hope for Christian music, if I am allowed to have that, knowing that I have been part of this industry not as long as other people, but was able to report on this. My hope is that one overarching form, right, of accountability, like one set of principles or details or code of conduct, something that people can sign on to, something that people can own. In my mind, that has to be a solution. But if we can't have that, if we can't have one overarching power detailing, like, these are the expectations in terms of how you treat people, I'm talking like payment, sexual assault and harassment. Some people, they may consider alcohol part of that. I would say that probably depends on the camp, because I don't think we can simply blame alcohol for what happened in these stories. They were a contributing factor, but we make a mistake if we say we make it a dry tour and it doesn't happen. Dry tours can certainly help. There's no doubt about that. Everything is magnified with alcohol, and particularly too much alcohol. But we can't go on a crusade against alcohol and forget that alleged criminal activity, sexual assaults, harassments, possible cover-up has happened here that honestly didn't need alcohol to fuel it. It happens anyway. And so let's not go on a witch hunt against the wrong thing here. Let's be real. The main priority in all of this is how do we protect the most vulnerable people in our circles? And that happens to be crew members. It happens to be the youngest people in our ranks. It happens to be females. It happens to be people in minorities. And that's not to say that people who have been in Christian music for a long time can't experience these things by any means. But we do know that as your power and your influence grows in any area of society, it's a lot harder to have access to those type of people because they have more people looking out for them. They have more weight. They have a more equal power balance with an alleged perpetrator. Whereas if you were new to the industry, if you were young, if you are relying on this person to give you a job, then what do? There's a lot there. But my grand hope is that we have those sets of accountability in every camp. It's a big hope, but surely that's a bare minimum. I know that the heart of so many people in Christian music is that we do that. I know that there are so many good people in Christian music and that there are people who want to care for one another, who are really passionate and who have been seeking out great, creative, innovative ways to care for their team, to advocate for their team, and honestly to like make sure that the people that they employ take care of one another. Undoubtedly, there have been people holding up their own codes of conduct for years. That goes without saying. But what we've seen in these stories with Michael Tait is that there's a crack. And that's not a reason to hide and turn insular and say, well, Michael Tait is a sacrificial lamb. He's just one person. The rest of us don't do that. Look, Michael Tait, what we've learned, what we've heard about, that's the worst that I've heard. But we all still have a duty to do our own self-reflection and take care of one another. If we use Michael Tait as a sacrificial lamb in this story, or we blame alcohol, or we blame it on homosexuality, if we do any of those things, like if we make it small and aim it on this one thing, we miss an opportunity to protect and restore people in Christian music the way that Jesus wants them to. And in that, we get to be an even greater example of who Christ is within our community and broadly as we create more art and music. Again, that's not to say that people in Christian music aren't trying to do the right thing or that they haven't been doing the right thing. But we can't just pinpoint this as it's Michael Tait's fault, because the fact is he got away with this for 4 decades and we can't just say who knew and who didn't know. We have to say, even if I didn't know, I now have a responsibility as a member of this community to act on behalf of these survivors and make sure there are no future survivors of anyone. Basically, that's what the responsibility is. And I also truly don't know why, in some respects, it falls on a relatively before this unknown journalist to say that, when I was genuinely, sincerely hoping and praying that people with more power and influence than me would say that. And there have been some incredible people who have spoken out and sort of said, we condemn this behaviour and this and this and this. Don't give up on the Christian music industry. Look, there have been people who said all sorts of things. That was much needed and great, and they risked a lot by even saying it. It's sort of like, well, the story happened now and it's done, and great, we turn the tide. I'm happy for this story to be done. This cost me everything. We can't not respond to this like Christ would want us to. So please, my friends in Christian music, whether you feel like you have a ton of power or no power, please continue to advocate and fight for what is good and true. I know so many of you have been fighting this for so long, and you have been showing this courage and humility and kindness for so long, and you have fought for it, and you fight for the goodness, and you show Jesus to so many people, and you believe in that in this industry. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's in that fight, who's in it for those reasons. My ask is that if you haven't spoken up yet, or you haven't taken a role in that, whatever that looks like, that you do it, please. Because lives genuinely depend on this, guys. Maybe that sounds like an exaggeration, but I've spent 2.5 years, nearly 3 years now, in the depths of this story. I have felt like I have lived out some of these stories with the survivors. Now, I haven't gone through the trauma they have. I'm not saying that. But I have gone through these stories detail by detail by detail multiple times. I have asked some incredibly difficult questions, and I have been on the end of the phone to people spilling trauma to me that people can't even fathom, some which gets reported and some doesn't. I know what the cost is because I've seen the cost. I personally refuse to let another generation of young people experience the same level of heartache and pain and harassment and abuse because we missed something or because we were so comfortable in our own way of doing things and were so scared of change that we didn't speak up. If we want Christian music to last, if we want it to survive, if we want it to be everything that God wants it to be, I think that's the biggest thing. Christian music will survive. We know that. But if we want it to be everything God wants it to be, not what I want it to be, but everything that God wants it to be, then surely we need to be open to doing that hard work. You know, by the time I release this episode, perhaps something will have come out and we'll be like, yay, like something huge has happened. Maybe something will be put in place. I don't know. And I don't pretend to think that my words hold a lot of weight to people. I think following these articles, people may be a little bit more sensitive to what I say, but I don't have, we know that I don't have the gravitas to change things in Christian music. There's only a handful of people who can do that. And so if you're one of those people, I just ask, please do it. Please do it. You have the money and the resources. Please do it. Not just because I'm asking you, but because it's actually right. Thank you. All right, that's all for today. A very long episode, but a really necessary one. With this is the hope. With this, this episode, we're sort of putting a full stop to the Michael Tait stories on this podcast. I don't plan to come back to this or do another Q&A, but this is something that we had to address as a family, especially considering that I wrote it, and so I hope that this answers some of your questions. Future news may come out, and if it does come out, it would come out through the Roy's Report or secularly through The Guardian, so you can keep your eyes on that. But basically, that's sort of like, let's put a full stop on reporting on it, and now pray and advocate and ask our favourite artists to put into action the protections and the hope that we need in this industry going forward, because as we saw at the latest Dove Awards, God is doing something spectacular in this industry. But the sense of camaraderie and hope and restoration at the latest Dove Awards it really felt like a landmark to me. And it was different to previous years, nearly like a rebellion of saying, we're not going to let the dark take this industry, we're not going to let disillusionment take this industry, we're not going to let hypocrisy and power take this industry, we're going to do it for the right reasons. And that's the heart of so many people in Christian music, and I love that. And so now our challenge is to take that and go, okay, now we actually have to address it head on. Well, that's a lovely note to finish it on. My name's Jessica Morris. Friends, if you enjoyed hearing from Josiah, please go and connect with him. He's on Instagram at Jojo Dancer. Link is in the show notes. His book, On Fire for God, is out in January. You want to pick up a copy for sure. It doesn't matter whether you're still in the evangelical church or not, you'll learn something from this. So check it out. Link again is in the show notes, and make sure you go and show Josiah some support and love. He has done incredibly good, hard, important work on this part, and I'm grateful for it. All right, friends, that's all I have for you today. Good news is, next week I'll have another episode for you, and it will be far lighter and far more... No, I would say this episode was hope-filled, but it was just like when you're trawling through mud to get to the hope. That's what today was. Next episode, we're probably more standing in the light. Oh, that just came out. Anyway, here we are. But our next episode will be a lot, hopefully lighter and great, because, drum roll please, we are talking to Lecrae. I know. After all these years, we got Lecrae on the podcast, and to say that I am stoked by that, and is an understatement. So, friends, make sure that you've subscribed, throw us a review if you have one, and I'll talk to you next week about some slightly lighter topics. Until then, here's to hope.
systems of oppression fueled by hate, held up by a lie we can't escape. Humanity, a history of tragedy. Does it have to be the future of us all? Violence, power, struggle, fear, and shame. Will the story always be the same? Can we ever be the people we are meant to be? Does it have to be the future of us all? Love shall overcome. Love shall